Yeah. Okay. This is called A Coach to Calvary. And Mark requested one. I chose this, and there's a third one in case you say, yay, more. Okay. I couldn't have known it at the time, but Uncle Johnny's wake was the last one I would attend in the parlor of someone's home. After that event, the custom died out, as families chose to use funeral parlors instead. With that word, parlor, mortuaries hoped to reassure people nothing essential had changed, but it had indeed. Johnny was husband to Rosie, my mother's younger sister. Their 4 children were the cousins who'd been playmates and companions for 7 years of my early life. They lived in a building connected to ours on Madison Street on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. Their railroad flat was at the top of the stoop above the basement unit. We went back and forth into one another's homes and lives. Only when I saw him laid out did I realize that I had never seen Uncle Johnny's face in repose. He was also always referred to as a great kidder. The rascal with his curly black hair, his mischievous eyes. Black Irish, they called him. A ladies' man as well. We all knew that. Hadn't I seen his lanky body scaling the fire escapes in the dark, disappearing into the kitchen windows of women who responded to his flirty eyes? He'll get his one of these days, said the envious males. Their aunt wives saw him driving the Journal-American flatbed truck that carried 4 or 5 rolls of newsprint, crisscrossed with ropes, bumping noisily on the uneven paving stones. He brought it to a gear-grinding stop, leaped across the clunky metal toolbox mounted on the running board, and ran up the stone stoop 2 steps at a time. To onlookers he explained with a wink that he'd come home for a nooner. Saucy? Oh, yes. Minutes later, too soon to even finish the coffee he actually came home for, he burst through the doorway, wiping his coffee from his upper lip, finishing the last of a cruller. I hoped that he would smile at me, for I also felt the pull of his charm. He gave me the first $50 I ever owned, pressing it into my small, moist palm with spatula fingers smudged with trucker's grime, as if he were pushing a large raisin into dough. Everyone thought that his end would come at the hands of an enraged husband, but it arrived as a result of the death of a boy who ran heedlessly into the path of his truck. That stopped the ticking of his Don Juan heart. Grief-stricken and deranged, he drove his truck to the parish priest, telling him that he was delivering paper to make catechism books. Not long afterwards, Rosie and the 4 fatherless children were in our kitchen, wailing in sorrow at his death. My mother had to settle them, then deal with the funeral arrangements. Their parlor needed to be emptied out so that the beer and the folding chairs could be put into place. Donations of food for a proper feast had to be found. My older brothers told us in a reverential voice there would be ham. Ham, he said, cripes, don't I love ham. There was potato salad, pickles, and bread as well. A keg of beer and bottles of whiskey needed to be procured from a connection, since Prohibition had cut off normal avenues. We could get seltzer bottles and strawberry soda in pitchers from Sammy's candy store across the street. My little sister Eily and I listened to the arrangements, thrilled at the unfolding drama. A skinny little man from the funeral parlor stood in front of Mama, asking how many coaches would we need to take us to Calvary Cemetery in Queens. This was the enormous old Catholic burial ground for New York City. There were few automobiles on the streets in those days, so the prospect of riding in a car was a thrilling one. Our experience of travel had been confined to subways and buses. A funeral crepe hung to the right of the street door, announcing a death. It was a wide purple ribbon, holding discreetly subdued flowers, with a white blossom in the center to relieve the darkness. Heavy drapes hung over the windows of Aunt Rosie's parlor, so that no light entered. Why did the room holding Johnny's body have to be so dark? He wasn't going to wake up. A tall and thick white candle stood at the head of the bier where he lay, the upper body of half of his body showing. I was told to kneel on the pad, bow my head respectfully, then kiss him. The trouble was, it didn't look like him. The wayward curls were swept back off his forehead. His skin looked dry and yellow, and he was wearing a suit. I kissed his cold cheek and came away with powder clinging to my lips. Flowers swamped the room so that my chest was wheezing. But I knew as I backed away that I had done it right, that I didn't give them anything to talk about. The them were women wearing black hats resembling upside-down kettles, who sat on folding chairs watching with half-shut, stalking eyes the behavior of everyone who approached the bier. They cupped their hands in front of their mouths and whispered into each other's ears. "Look at her, ladders on her stockings." I glanced at the kneeling woman, hoping to see this unusual sight, but no, there was nothing. Referring to a modest floral display perched on a wire stand, another said, "Could they spare it? And him with a job in sanitation." Mama was trying to hold up Aunt Rosie's shoulders, which had slumped down so she looked like a discarded doll. The mourners entered the room, stood in front of her murmuring, "I'm sorry for your trouble." I went to the kitchen for food. At least there the windows were open and a fresh autumn breeze blew in. The men were working intently on their drinks, talking aloud to dominate each other. "He'll never be the man his father was, I tell you." Another one, "If he so much as looks cross-eyed at me, I'll flatten him." The woman cutting the cake said to me, "You're taking up room, go outside." How could I not take up room? Unless I was a ghost or smoke. And how could my cousins sleep for 3 nights with their dead father in the next room? I couldn't ask. Someone announced, "Here come the Murphys." They were the truckers and longshoremen who lived down by the East River, tough, quarrelsome, and serious drinkers. They were always discussing swag. I thought they meant curtains, till I learned better. Leading the group was old Mag. Her pugnacious expression dared anyone to cross her. She was a source of fascination to us children because she could roll her eyes back in her head, leaving only the whites showing. It makes me laugh to think of it. She overflowed the folding chair, stubby hands crossed across her large belly, the whites of her eyes gleaming spookily in the dark room. We children went out into the hallway to practice making mag eyes. Yeah. Tim did the best, but he was always a great mimic. "Do you think she has fits?" "Nah, she's fine. Haven't you noticed she never misses anything, even with her eyes that way?" A voice from the stoop shouted, "The father's coming." Now everyone would have to cram together while he gave the blessing and said the rosary. Older people who grew up in Ireland knelt on the floor the entire time. The women in the chairs rearranged their faces into pious expressions. Old Mag growled, "Where's Hooley?" Her son answered from the side of his mouth, "Legless. He's sitting in the jakes with ice on his head." We shivered in anticipation, and she did it. She rolled her eyes magnificently up into her head. It was brilliant. Mama led us out into the street to one of the waiting cars. I could see my reflection in its polished surface. The driver stood next to it, nattily dressed with shiny boots and a visored cap. He pulled down 2 jump seats so that Eily and I could sit, and Mama told us to wait there until she returned. We ran our hands across the pearly gray plush that covered everything and felt it spring back each time. Glass vases mounted near the doors held pink flowers. Neighbors lined the sidewalks, watching 2 husky men assist Aunt Rosie down the stoop. She seemed to have lost the ability to walk. Not until years later would I understand how loss and grief can paralyze. Mama sat down opposite us, and we began the long, slow ride to Calvary. When we were nearing the cemetery, Eily and I turned around and knelt on the small seats so we could see ahead. Massive iron gates dwarfed the cars. Miles of battered stone crosses stretched out beyond them, tilting crazily if someone had kicked them to one side. Large statues of mournful stone angels, covered with green moss, hovered protectively over some of the graves. When I turned to Eily, she looked woebegone, her lip curled downward. "What's the matter?" I asked. She whispered in a tremulous voice, "But where is the coach?" I must have looked puzzled, for she repeated, "The coach, the pumpkin coach." I realized then that her only knowledge of that word came from the Cinderella story. How disappointing the day was for her. Nowhere among those drunkenly toppled crosses and moldering angels could I see a pumpkin coach or a fairy godmother. "Look," I said in an effort to cheer her, "I can make mag eyes."